Right. The initial video game wave really lasted from Atari and everything, from like late 1970s into about 1983. 83 was the year it kind of all collapsed. Now, at the time, the people didn't really realize what was going on. They thought it's a fad, it's hula hoops, right? Well, it's run its course. It was very rare people, and one of them was the guy who was in charge of marketing for Mattel Electronics, who looked at it and said, wait a minute, yeah, people are losing money here, but the demand for video games is going up. More people than ever are playing video games. What had happened was too many companies got into the market. And unfortunately, any company could come in and make games that could play on an Atari or an Intellivision or a ColecoVision. And so the result was that the money for these games was going to those companies and not to Mattel or Atari or Coleco. So as a result, the people who made the hardware weren't getting the money from the software.
I think part of the problem, and this is a mistake Mattel made from the outset, our game unit was better, but it cost more than the Atari 2600. What they didn't realize, and actually Microsoft of all companies did realize this later, is the cost of the unit is a one-time deal. The money's in the cartridges. And that $100 difference was 3 cartridges. So if they had priced the Intellivision at the same price as the Atari 2600, they would have done much better.
Now, what changed after that was Nintendo came along with this new idea saying, hey, why don't we make it so that only games that we manufacture will play on it? And we'll let other companies make games for it, but they have to get a license and we have to manufacture. So if Activision makes a big hit game for the Nintendo or the Sega or whatever other platform, the people make the platform, who make the hardware, get a piece of it. And that's a market that's worked very well. Microsoft does that with the Xbox, Sony does it with the PlayStation, and of course Nintendo still does it. So the result is that somebody else comes along, EA comes along, makes a big hit game, they get money, the hardware people get money. Back in the 1980s, all these software companies were coming out making games, most of which were pretty low quality. They were rushing them out there. They were paying millions for licenses because they wanted to have something E.T. that people would recognize, and then they got it, that was a really bad game. And I hate to say that because every time I say that in an interview, they always then cut to the guy who actually programmed the E.T. going, oh, well, they only gave me 3 weeks and it worked. I challenge anybody to make a game work in 3 weeks. Like, I don't mean to slam that guy. They didn't give him any time. But it was a bad game. So.
But I still trace the first downfall of the video game industry to the Atari Pac-Man. So many people bought that game, and it was so bad.
So bad.
And I really think that started souring people. They started questioning, what am I getting for my money? It caused a bit of a revolt at Atari too, because Atari, unlike Mattel, paid royalties. You got a 10 cents per cartridge royalty, and they would give you an advance against it. Well, they thought that, Pac-Man, that's not that hard a game, so they gave it to one of their junior developers, and he made. They sold 10 million cartridges. He made $1 million out of it. And it was a bad game, and so the other Atari programmers, some of them who were extremely talented, because the 2600 was really hard to program.
Yeah.
It had hardware support for Palm. When you wrote a 2600 program, you actually wrote 92 little programs, one for each scan line, as the gun went across. And you had to count the cycles for each instruction because you had to hit the gun at a certain time to be able to make things appear on the screen. It was really complicated stuff to do. Very tedious and difficult to debug. And some of these guys, just knowing how they think, you look at some of these games, oh my God, how do they do that? That is so hard to do. Pac-Man one was just terrible. It had 2 moving objects, so they used one for all 4 ghosts, which is why the ghosts flickered so badly. And I think that kind of started the downfall.
and that type of thing happened over and over and over again. So people just got burned too often, and so there was this glut of stuff out there on the shelf. No one knew what was good, what was bad. So they stopped buying it. All of it came back to the manufacturers. Mattel wasn't making any money. The price of the original $300 price of the Intellivision, by this time they're making the Intellivision 2, which was kind of a cheaper version, but the same thing. They were selling for $70, so they'd gone from $300 to $70. So they weren't making any money off of it. They were just trying to get the, it's like the whole thing with Gillette. You sell the razor, you give away the razor, and you sell the blades.
Right.
So the hope was, make the cheapest possible, but then make the money off the games. But if Activision, Magic, Sega, Parker Brothers, Coleco are all making games for your platform, you're not making any money. The money ran out, and it was only Terry Valesky, senior marketing exec, vice president at Mattel, said there's still a market for this stuff. He bought the rights, and I think in 1975 the only system that was still for sale in the United States was Intellivision. Then Nintendo came in, and then Sega then came in under this new paradigm of the hardware manufacturer getting a piece of the software, and that saved the industry. But that's why we went down in the beginning. And like I say, it wasn't the quality of our games were bad. It was the other stuff that was out there, and the bad reputation, especially with the 2600 games, because everybody got into 2600. There's never been a definitive list of the 2600 games, because so many people, and people keep discovering new ones that people made. What? I never even heard of this one.
I made one.
And there are just so many out there that everyone says there is no definitive list. There are thousands of them. There's 125 for the Intellivision, so for collectors, the Intellivision is easier to deal with, because you can get those 125. Some of them may cost $1,000, but for the most part, you can actually find all 125 of them. But it was just Terry who said, I think there's still a market here. And by hiring the Blue Sky Rangers on a very limited budget, doing a couple of games a year, and selling to the mailing list, sometimes in the stores. Toys R Us and some of the larger stores still carried them up until the time that Sega and Nintendo really took over the market. He managed to keep it going. So we managed the television for a console. I think it may be the longest console that actually plugs into the TV. I think the Game Boy went longer. But in terms of a video game system, Intellivision, which was introduced in test markets in California in 1979, it continued to manufacture and sell new games in the catalog for Christmas of 1989. So we had a full decade of new games being produced for it.